So I wanted to thank IFPRI for giving this opportunity to bring out maybe some voices from the community in India and maybe represented through a civil society voice. Before I get started, I'll have maybe 3 disclaimers. One, I will be restricting myself. I see a very pluralist global audience here, so I'll be restricting my talk to the Indian context. In that sense, parochial. But I should say that we have the distinction of maybe the world's largest number of small and marginal farmers. We also have the distinction of the world's largest number of malnourished children. So in that sense, maybe very contextual, despite the parochial geographical limitation. Second disclaimer is that the inclusion levers, particularly, I'll be restricting it to the 2 broad spaces. One, the fact that policies and schemes probably often exclude these 2 segments that I mentioned, which is small and marginal farmers, as well as mothers and children, in the context of anything that India have ended up creating as policies. And so how do we include them would be what I would focus, and examples from the field on that. And the third disclaimer is that the governance pitch that I shall share will be more in terms of examples that have been essential for good outcomes, which included the whole idea of what I just heard Cheryl speak about, the need for evidence-based advocacy, which eventually leads to a political demand creation. Because the 2 segments that we are talking are often either completely voiceless, 0 to 5 children, or small farmers whose shoutings are not heard enough in the echelons of democracy. So how do we bring out these examples? Those are the disclaimers. I'll start by trying to highlight the fact that, we in India have a situation where nearly 80% of farmers are landless, small, marginal. Traditionally, they brought food to our dining tables every day. And we have a situation now with economic reforms, with globalization, with opening of markets, and with the right kind of resources coming in, and hopefully the right direction, the whole ship moving, we still find that they have to now stand in queues to get basic food grains, basic coarse grains. As day before yesterday, Dr. Swaminathan called them now nutritional grains, the millets and the rest. So for that, they have to wait in queues to get through the public distribution system. It's an irony of sort that the essential nutrients that they were used to eating traditionally, the essential nutritious food that they were offering to the rest of the food basket of the nation, is deprived from their plates. So this whole irony of new economic templates changing the plates of these farmers' portfolio in their homes is one issue that we have been seeing in close quarters working with communities across India. And to my mind, a colleague of mine was telling the other day, it's the issue of the 3G scam. We in India have a 2G scam going on a different plane. The 3G scam is about, grains, greens, and grams missing from the plates of small farmers. How do we get these 3Gs back into their plates? And if we can probably look at that, we would probably have got the mix of nutritional security for small farmers who also happen to have children who are malnourished addressed at a practical level. So what kind of inclusion levers and what kind of governance solutions have we found from the country so far? Similar situation is the fact that we have the largest 0 to 6 age group feeding program probably the world has ever seen, the ICDS program, for those of you know already. It's a multi-billion-dollar program. Why do we, despite having this for many decades, and now almost in every district in the country, why do we have 1 out of 2 children in this country malnourished? So what has been the exclusion there? It's been an all-inclusive program. It's been well targeted. The goal has been defined. Why still do we have this problem? So can we look at 3 specific small examples that I will highlight, which probably have answers to this? One is, and then before I explain that, I'll spend a line on what kind of an organization do I represent in a sentence to say how we have been fortunate to hear these voices, to see these inclusion and governance examples in close quarters. Technically, we're a not-for-profit, but we have a revenue model of outsourcing not so well-run government programs and implementing them on behalf of the government, which would mean, therefore, feeding 1.5 million kids every day. All of it, incidentally, with fortified with vitamins food that we give. Or working with over 300 small and marginal farmer cooperatives across arid lands in various parts of the country. Working with the indigenous people in the hills who also represent the malnourished population. We have a 20,000 group that we work with separately. And specifically, combining, which typically not-for-profits have not been used to doing, what I call as the 5 Ps, ensuring that public sector projects are outsourced, so we closely work with the public sector, bring in private sector engagement. Somehow private sector is considered anathema to look at social issues, so just include them strategically into what we do, even if it's an engagement for advocacy. Work closely at the village level with the panchayats, which is my 3rd P. Ensure that philanthropists are brought to engage in discussions, particularly if not anything else, on coming out with measurement metrics. Because government, by default, are very good in inputs, but suffer when it comes to independent assessments, independent metrics to look at evidence-based results. And lastly, work very closely with politicians. In a vibrant democracy like ours, we have learned the hard way that unless you include the polity in what we are doing, we're not going to have it sustained. And many of these excluded sectors we are talking are not able to bring in the political will needed because they don't have the voice. So that's been specifically a work that we've been doing. So the 3 quick projects, one we did was a project with the World Bank. It has been a 5-year longitudinal study in a portion in in a place in central India where the indices of children and women's literacy and nutrition have been one of the lowest. And we called it the Project Bachpan, meaning Project Childhood, if you please. And this was with the state government, trying to see if we actually, at each village level, and this was a block of 230 villages, each village, if we could include all the players who are the opinion makers, to play the role of a community-based body that will bring in the convergence and the accountability that the government systems need to do, to see whether that by itself can create some levers that are not functioning to work when it comes to implementation. That was one objective. And the second in that region, in this Project Bachpan, I just want to highlight that the World Bank is soon going to release this report, and so it will be available as public document. But the second was to see that women and mothers, can we help them understand and recognize whether their children are nourished or not? And in that case, if we do that, can we empower them to know what should they do? What calls should they make? Whom should they access? And how do they tackle it? If we did this for 3-4 years, very determined manner in, say, in these 230 villages, we wanted to see through third-party measurement, would the indices related to child's health go up? And I'm happy to report that it tremendously went up. There was no external input needed, no external food needed, no fortified food came in this case. Now there is a demand for all these from the community. It's a separate story, and it is very welcoming. But the just empowerment of them with the right knowledge and the integration, and that's in that context, the conference itself is very heartening, that you have brought these different segments to talk together. So we realized in Indian context, you had the health department, the rural development department, the women and child department, the education department, they worked in silos. And to get them together at the village level was the challenge. And to empower them and to make that framework work was the example that we felt made a lot of difference. And the second example has been the need that we need to actually bring in advocacy. So we had to bring together a huge movement in the form of getting multi-party politicians, elected parliamentarians, to go around the country and do advocacy, expose them to the problem of nutrition, expose them to the problem of interlinkages missing. And now they have championed us to come out with a citizens report, which would be an evidence-based advocacy. The citizens report is going to measure where are the children, what is their problem, and how do we ensure that we have heard the voices of women. So we're coming out with the hunger and malnutrition report led by this group of multi-party politicians, where an independent body comes out with the primary data of children and their existence and the pockets where they're existing with malnourishment very high, and what do their mothers think about their perceptions and understanding of malnutrition. The jury is still out on that. We should have the report coming out, but in the places that even I could go personally and listen to them, what was very overwhelming is the fact that wherever there have been financial incentives by the government in terms of policies, be it for institutional delivery, be it for accessing coarse grains than the polished, nutrient-less, deficient rice, there have been examples where the behavior of the community changed to accessing them. Policies and incentives played a tremendous role in their behavioral change. Also the fact that, by and large, women did not have experience of identifying whether the children are malnourished or not. And the very awareness that could be created by simple tools made them completely empowered to go and create a demand that they didn't have. So the last example, and with that I conclude, has been our work with the indigenous people. They've been growing cash crops, and we've been providing them the marketing linkages. This is coffee and black pepper. We found to our horror that all of them were also missing from their plates the three Gs, and so were nutrient deficient. We realized that we had to include the government's policies and incentivize this group of indigenous people to opt for this kind of diversified legumes and greens and grams production as part of their agricultural portfolio, so that they would come back to it, because the economics of it didn't make sense for them to do any of these original nutrient crops, and so they were stuck to the cash crops, although we were party to that crime. And only when we pulled the levers of inclusion using economic means, using governance means, and legitimized how much it is relevant bringing in this biodiversity, that we saw a huge change in the whole hilly region that we were talking about, where they were agreed towards biodiversity. So to conclude, I think we need financial policies, we need inclusion mechanisms which are created by maybe civil society and other players in helping the voice of these people reach the policy makers, and thereby ensure that the 3Gs are back, that the mothers have the incentives to do their role, which is to look after their children in a manner that is purely based on informed decisions. Thank you.